Oh, it's hard to sum up in just a few words, but it is incredibly eerie. It is incredibly strange. Life is not normal here at the moment at all. There is a lot of suspicion around the streets. Everyone wants to check your documents. A lot of military confronting you, asking you who you are and what you are doing here. There is, of course, the constant wailing of sirens signalling their air raids. I wouldn't be surprised if we heard one over the course of this conversation. They pick up at this time of night. It is a very strange world that Ukrainians are living in. It is far from the norm and everyone is very much on edge.
Are you actually under curfew at the moment?
We are under curfew, which is why we're kind of standing in a courtyard very near our apartment. We're just in the backyard. The curfew is in place from 10 o'clock at night through to 6 in the morning, and that is really just because they don't want anyone out and about, not just because of the risk, but because they're assuming anyone out at that time could be a Russian, and they would assume that they would then go in and arrest that person. So for the sake of clarity, they've just said, everybody stay at home.
So when you have been out and about during the day, and, you know, I'm not talking about the military that you're talking to, but the regular Ukrainians, what are they saying to you about the war?
Well, they're frightened, and I think that's a fair way to feel, but they are also incredibly determined. They have a sense that it is coming their way, but they're very much prepared. And a lot of people are very resolute about the fact they've lived a long time with Russia as their bad neighbour. That is how they often describe Russia. And they're kind of saying it's now or never. Now is the time for us to sort this once and for all, establish our independence, establish our freedom and fight. And so there is a real sense of defiance, a real sense of determination. They want to draw a line under this once and for all and stand up and say, we will not be bullied, we will not be bullied out of our homeland.
The intense Russian assault is carrying on, and you've got Vladimir Putin sitting up there in Moscow claiming that his military is not targeting civilians. How is that going down?
Yeah, this is the continuous narrative that Putin is pushing out, but it just completely contradicts what we're seeing in the evidence. Constant bombardments, constant cluster bombs being dropped in highly dense residential areas. The EU came out today and said that as the fighting has continued, it has intensified, and they are now seeing the deliberate bombing of the likes of houses and schools and hospitals, which is obviously incredibly concerning, and it is why there are these allegations of war crimes now being discussed. So a lot of concern about the civilian casualties involved in this now, with experts suggesting we will see more of it. The more Putin feels like his troops perhaps aren't making the progress he had expected of them, he is going to double down on these bombardments and really put the pressure on Ukraine via those civilian casualties.
And at the same time, the intense attacks on Ukraine's infrastructure goes on. I mean, we had Russia firing on the biggest nuclear power plant. They've now seized it. What are the implications there?
That is hugely concerning for everyone. In the last 24 hours, that has just really ramped up the concern. World leaders have been very quick to condemn that for obvious reasons, describing it as what could have been a catastrophic nuclear disaster. In fact, President Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, went as far as to say if that fire had continued and an explosion occurred, it would have been the equivalent of 6 Chernobyl. So there is a huge concern now that they are in there and it is occupied by Russians, because the Ukrainian staff who are usually there and keeping an eye on the safety and the security of that infrastructure are now perhaps not getting the access and the communication they would usually need. Now, the good news is the fire was extinguished. They understand now that the radiation levels haven't changed. But the broader concern people have now is what this means in terms of the Geneva Convention. You're not meant to target nuclear infrastructure in times of war, and now there are warnings going out from experts all over the world that those countries that do have nuclear plants should be on particular watch for the fact that now this rule has been broken once. Could it happen again?
Russia has agreed in those peace talks on the Belarusian border to a possible ceasefire to open up like a humanitarian corridor through Ukraine to allow aid in. But there's no end in sight to the war. How are those talks being viewed?
Well, that was a small win in the scheme of things. These peace talks have gone into round 2. They will now go into round 3. That is what we're hearing. I think people here are very cynical, very sceptical of anything to do with Putin, anything to do with his commitment. So even that peace corridor has been met with a little bit of, oh, we'll believe it when we see it. I think there is a lot of trust and a growing faith and respect in President Zelensky by the Ukrainians. They really trust their president, and I think they hope that he is going into these negotiations with the feeling they have, which is they are not willing to compromise at all on their independence. So if that is what is prolonging these negotiations, Ukrainians are happy enough with that, although it is coming at such a steep price.
Yeah, and Zelensky has been obviously, urging NATO and the West to get involved, close the skies, send more planes. But NATO has again said it won't send troops and it won't close the airspace. So what's the feeling on the ground there about how the rest of the world is responding?
I think this is quite two-pronged. I think on one hand you have Ukrainians feeling incredibly grateful for the support they've had from everyday people. In Europe in particular, there's been a huge outpouring of love and support for the refugees who have arrived, particularly in Poland, people coming from all corners of Europe to offer their support in terms of shelter or transport to wherever they need to go so that these refugees have a place to stay for as long as they do. But certainly on the political side of the board, there is a lot of disappointment in the lack of support, and actually you get the sense, and people will tell you here in Ukraine, that we know we're in it alone. They say it is up to us to fight this battle and to win this battle because no one is coming to help us, and that is why we're seeing so many Ukrainians go to such extreme lengths to be involved and to help with this fight, with civilians, picking up arms and joining the territorial defence and going out to fight with absolutely no skill base at all.
Lisette, you've been doing these heart-wrenching reports on refugees pouring out through Poland. I mean, can you give us a sense of the scale of the humanitarian cost of this war? It is hard.
It is really hard to put any sort of explanation on how big it is because it is just monstrous, and it is getting bigger every day. So already they're saying over 1 million refugees have fled the border. Half of them have gone through Poland just because that is the closest, it's easiest to access, and they're expecting that these numbers will grow to 5 million, and that is just those who are fleeing the country. There are also those who are internally displaced here in Ukraine. So the cost of the lives and people that are re-evaluating where they go, where they live, what their homes are, what their futures are, what their jobs will be. People have packed up their children with, nothing but one little bag full of some nappies and a few muesli bars, and they have made this huge journey into the unknown. And I think a lot of people talk a little bit about, I'll stay at a friend's for 2 weeks and then I'll be able to come home. But as the days have progressed, I think the feeling on the ground has been dramatically, it's changing to we might not ever go home.
Yeah, just quickly on that, what do those locals really think Putin's endgame is?
Yeah, there is no love lost here for Putin. People hate him. That is the fact of the matter. And, most people, if you ask them that, will just say he's mad and he will go all the way. So that is what Ukrainians are bracing for. They are bracing for a big fight, a long fight, and they are not going to give an inch. So they're expecting this to last because they don't feel like Putin will ever come to a negotiating table and be sensible, be realistic, be fair. That is the feeling you get from Ukrainians.
Lisette Reymer and cameraman Dan Pennant, stay safe there in Lviv, and thank you so much for your time.